to the Diamond Vogel Studios here in Pewaukee, Wisconsin, and it's time for another edition of the Preacher and the Prodigy podcast. We are continuing with our preseason overview conversations. Already, we have talked about what's new in terms of the playoff, in terms of conference realignment. One thing we didn't talk about, which we noticed in the Florida State Georgia Tech game, by the way, Fire Up Jackets, was that there is a 2-minute warning.
Correct.
So there's a few other new things. We don't have the new kickoff rules from the NFL yet, but lots of new things. In our second podcast, we talked about what we might learn about the real world college football season based on the virtual college football that is being played around the world on NCAA 25. I saw you were playing today as the Georgia Bulldogs. Way to pick up the challenge there.
Got to get some easy wins right off the bat.
Get some easy
Warm
wins.
up a little bit. Yeah.
Last I saw, you're up 21-0. So, but you were playing Kyle the Accord,
Honda
McCord, whatever it is. A great nickname. Not as good as Maserati Marv. And now we want to lean into the Michigan preview a little bit and then talk about the best teams nationally on the offensive side of the football.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to take most of our time here looking specifically at the Wolverines, what they have back, what's going to be new going forward, and then consider, hey, who might be some of the top points per game, yards per game, efficiency offenses around the country. So let's start with Michigan here. It begins with quarterback. What are you saying right now under center for Michigan, Jericho?
I think everybody is kind of assuming it's going to be Alex Orji, and I think that's the right call as of now. We didn't see a lot of Davis Warren last year, and we honestly didn't see a lot of Alex Orji last year either, particularly throwing the football. Neither of them had a lot of attempts, but we did see Orji incorporated in a few QB powers as kind of a change of pace. Give JJ a quick breather. I think it's probably going to be Orji when the season starts, but I wouldn't be surprised if we start out the season up on Fresno by a good amount, comfortable lead, and we start rotating quarterbacks to see, well, if they make a player make the right read, something like that, that stands out to the coaches and to Kurt Campbell. I would assume that people are going to be relying heavily on Jack Tuttle being there for probably about double the time being in college football as the other two quarterbacks. So I think he'd be almost like an older brother to them. But in terms of talent, I really believe it's a 2-horse race between Davis Warren and Alex Orji.
Yeah, Jack Tuttle's like 52 years old at this point.
Right.
He's been playing college football since the Nixon administration. People talk about rebuilding years and they talk about reloading years. Right? I don't know if it was Florida State maybe back in the 90s they coined that term. We don't rebuild, we reload. I think this is a remodeling year for Michigan. Mm-hmm. You're especially one of the two floors of the house. You're going to strip this thing back to the studs. You're going to go back to offensive line and run game, but then you have to figure out how you want to decorate the house going forward. And we've talked about this. My biggest concern is not just committing to Alex Orji for a season. It's what that commitment does to the next few seasons. I think it's already part of the recruiting strategy by rival schools to say Michigan doesn't throw the football. They point to the Penn State game, 32 runs in a row. And they say, hey, wide receivers should not go to Michigan. And so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy if you cannot throw the ball with Orji. Right. And so, I've had kind of a preference toward keeping Orji as that change of pace much more regularly and going with the best passer on the team. But I think it's going to be Alex Orji. I think that in a different universe, Michigan would say, hey, let's just hit the reset button and go with Jaden Davis because Jaden Davis is a highly mature young player. He had spring football. Excuse me. He was actually also with the team during the playoff run as well. Yeah. So, but I believe he has been told, his family's been assured he will redshirt. Doesn't mean he can't play a little bit against Arkansas State. It just means he won't play in more than 4 games of college football this year.
Yeah, I think it's going to be important, the difference of the season, and we could talk about this later as we go on. It's the arm talent is there in terms of our arm strength and ball velocity for Alex Orji. He has that.
It was for Joe Milton as well.
It's really just going to come down to the accuracy and how safe he can be, but also how we can deliver on 3rd down and 6.
Yep.
Not just show the ability to bomb it deep on 2nd and 2.
And my concern has been, what if you commit to the Orji offense, which is the game is played closer to the line of scrimmage. You don't do a lot of vertical passing. and then Orgy gets hurt. You don't have another Orgy on the team that can run that same offense. You can
Right.
have Warren out there to run a little bit, but he certainly cannot take up the same kind of pounding that Alex Orgy would take. So my preference would be to take the best passer on the team and heavily mix Orgy in, but it sounds like they're going to go with Orgy as a quarterback. Well, that's the biggest question mark on the offense. Let's go to the thing that's the most settled on the offense, and that's probably your personnel at running back and tight end. Let's start with
Yeah.
running back. So several functional tailbacks. It all begins with Donovan Edwards. Donovan Edwards had I wouldn't say an up and down season last year. He had a down and up season because for the first 10 or so games, Donovan Edwards was ghost. He could not find a hole. He did not play good football. He was not used as part of the passing game in ways that Michigan commentators and message board savants thought that he should be. And he really was kind of invisible. And Blake Corum shouldered much of the load all the way until the Penn State game when Donovan Edwards kind of broke out in that game. And of course, he was helpful down the stretch in a number of significant ways. Didn't do much against Iowa, but nobody did. And then ripped off two 40-plus yard touchdown runs early on against Washington. Donovan Edwards seems to be the kind of player that when he has a hole is just going to fly to the end zone, but he's not great at discovering the hole in the way that Blake Corum was.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, when we'll talk about the offensive line in just a minute, is Donovan Edwards the right guy as the feature back, or do you use Kalel Mullings as the feature back, knowing that Donovan Edwards is on the field every time, but you use him in different kinds of ways?
I think it's very situational in terms of, you know, like obviously they're going to have different personnel and different running backs for whether it's 3rd and 1 or 3rd and 9. But I think it's really going to be important seeing the start of the season how, like, if Donovan Edwards' vision did get better, because last year you have a great offensive line and he doesn't do much for the majority of the season. Now having a objectively worse offensive line with less experience and less chemistry, it's either going to be Donovan Edwards being able to see a hole and hit it versus dance in the backfield. I think Kalel is more of a see it and go kind of guy. When Donovan Edwards last year was trying to be like Blake Corum a little bit, I think that made him a little worse. He was trying to get those jump cuts in. No one could do it the way Blake could, which I think probably set him back a little bit. But I think it's going to be very situation based. Who was on the field, and even including Jordan Marshall, if it's just a kind of play where it's not really worth it to get Donovan injured, but if it's a passing down, you got a quicker guy out in space. You could put more Marshall in there too.
Yeah, I think Jordan Marshall is going to blow up, especially the second half of the season. Michigan identified this guy early on. They had him as their number one back in the country. Once he was in the fold, they stopped recruiting Taylor Tatum, and so I think there's a lot of really cool things that Jordan Marshall will do in his future. I think he'll get mixed in. So I'm seeing Donovan Edwards carrying the ball, maybe 40% of the time, Kalel Mullings 30% of the time, and then the other 30% gets splashed around between Samaj Morgan, Jordan Marshall, perhaps Ben Hall gets in there, Tavi Dunlap.
Cole Cabana possibly.
Cole Cabana's, I think people talk about X Factor. Cole Cabana really is the X Factor. You have no idea what you can get out of him. If you get what he was in high school, which is a burner and straight line speed, he could have a role in the offense, or even more so in special teams.
I'd say he's the X Factor on special teams, whether he will explode or not, because he is the fastest guy on the team. Is that right? Or one of the fastest guys on the team, undoubtedly. If he can find a role on special teams, then he could be a dangerous weapon there.
Let's talk a little bit about tight ends. We know that Michigan is coming into the season with, I don't really think there's a question, the top tight end in the country. I haven't seen any other players up there, for All-American ahead of him. Colston Loveland has had a great career at Michigan almost from the get-go. This kid out of Idaho just is a freak, and he's not Blake Bowers, but he's not far off either.
Brock Bowers, yeah.
Excuse me. And he's a fantastic receiver. Not as good a blocker, but he makes up for that. And I think Michigan's going to use him, I think, flanked out, split out a little bit more often, especially if he can if he can come out of that 22 personnel or something like that, take a corner with him or a linebacker with him, he's a matchup problem either way.
Yeah, that could be a huge problem. That might be the biggest strength for this Michigan offense this year is how smart we're going to be able to use, like how we'll be able to use Colston Loveland in the passing game, not as much as the running game because he's not as good of a blocker as AJ Barner or Max Bredesen was. We could talk about Bredesen too later.
Bredesen, yeah, in the
I would say he's going to be
Heartland zone.
Yeah, he's going to be too fast for linebackers to guard and too physical for cornerbacks and most safeties to line up against. So I think he's really going to be a huge problem, and you can have him go 100% for a while and then sub him in with Marlon Klein because he is also top 100 on the freaks list, and he could be a beast as well, break out when Colston Loveland is not on the field.
Definitely a more physical specimen than Colston Loveland, but we don't know about his hands, we don't know about his route running, but he is really a special athlete. Excuse me. So down the line, we have a couple of younger tight ends. You got Zach Marshall, and I'm really excited about the future for Brady Prieskorn as well, the true freshman who comes in from Michigan as well. Max Bredesen, we talked about too, playing that fullback role and kind of a hybrid tight end fullback. H-back sort. We may need him in the blocking game to come up to the line of scrimmage once in a while and serve as another blocking lineman. Not the biggest guy in the world, but he can do that as well. So he's a versatile player, and I think you want him on the field to protect the quarterback, if nothing less.
Right.
Let's go to the offensive line, where there is a complete wholesale change to the Michigan offensive line. Graduated so many fantastic players who were part of championships, and now it looks like Miles Hinton is going to be the starter at left tackle. Started a few games last year, kind of inconsistent on the year. Of course, he too has the frame of a first-round NFL tackle. So does Andrew Gentry, by the way, both monstrous human beings. Gentry on the right side, it sounds like is in a three-way battle with Jeff Percy, and then maybe also with redshirt freshman Evan Link. I'm sure Michigan would love to season Evan Link one more year in terms of the weight room, the understanding of the playbook. Perhaps maybe he's the future left tackle because they're very, very high on him, as they are on Andrew Sprague, the true freshman as well. I don't expect Sprague to see the field. Link very well might. Inside, we have this great question on center. It will be Greg Crippen, who it sounds like has been just a nose ahead of Raheem Anderson. But Michigan should be very confident that whichever person is snapping the ball at the start of every play is going to be a solid player. These two players who've been in the system quite a while, waited their turn behind two fantastic centers in Oluwatimi and Drake Nugent, who transferred into Michigan, and now it's their time to shine.
Yeah, I think it was almost important to keep that transfer mantra going, bringing in Josh Breed from Northwestern. I think he could be a huge pickup as well on the guards. But what's interesting with this team, or this line exactly, is how much these guys have sat. Like you talk about Anderson and Gentry and El Hadi, and all these people have sat and watched what it's like to be a Joe Morta winning offensive line, and now they have to go out and do it. So it's really going to be come down to almost feeling the game and just getting those reps in together. Miles Hinton could have a huge season, all Big Ten season, because he's got the frame. He just needs to work on footwork and technique and hands, and he could break out.
Yeah. The other starter we presume to be Giovanni El Hadi, who's getting a lot of praise this fall at the other guard position. And now let's go to the pass catchers. And this is where there's, again, a good deal of turnover that has happened. Michigan loses Roman Wilson and Cornelius Johnson to the NFL. But there's a new wave of wide receivers coming in, many of them with the last name starting with M. Yeah, so we have Samaj Morgan, a versatile player who's been used on some of those jet sweeps and end arounds. He's been a punt returner. Has shown some ability to be a good downfield wide receiver as well. And he's looking for his moment. I think he has the most upside of anyone on Michigan's roster right now.
Yeah, Jukebox.
Yep, Jukebox Morgan. Tyler Morgan, I think, is a little
Morris. It's going to get so confused.
Tyler Morris, rather. I think it's going to be more consistent. I think he is a a fine wide receiver as well. Not particularly big relative to some of the Braylon-esque receivers we've had in the past, but he may be the number one receiving option in terms of a downfield threat. I think people are expecting great things from Fred Moore as well, as he steps into his first year of really being one of the major contributors. And then there's Amarian Walker, who committed to Notre Dame, flipped to Michigan, went to Ole Miss had a cup of coffee, and now is back at Michigan again. He's the guy they've tried at two different positions. He just needs to find a role in football. Hopefully, it's playing the outside receiver at the University of Michigan. Settle into it, put on some weight. The guy's skinnier than you, Jericho. He cannot seem to put on any weight, so that he can block it and be a presence out there on the football field.
Yeah, and I think it was really weird not having, and it's probably going to be really weird not having a outside receiver like have a big frame receiver. So many slot guys with Morgan and Morris and the guys behind them. It feels like this year they almost need bigger guys because it feels like you're not going to be able to rip the ball across the middle like you could with JJ and have Roman Wilson run past defenders. You're going to need every now and then you're going to have to take a shot, and it's something we didn't need last year and we might need it this year. So really looking forward to Morian Walker to, like you said, put on some weight and get reps in. And hopefully he can find a role.
Yeah, there's been some chatter that this will help the Michigan passing game because more of those downfield guys are going to be single covered, given that there will be safeties and backers in the box. I don't think that that's anything to be excited about. I think that's actually an implication of having a less diverse offense when you lose J.J. McCarthy. But if you got a guy like a Morian Walker and he can figure it out, he might be that jump ball threat opposite Colston Loveland, because I do think that Colston Loveland is going to draw a lot of double teams.
Yeah, he'll be the number one option.
Yeah, but I'm not sure Colston Loveland will have the same statistical year because I think he's going to get so much attention.
Right.
Last year, Michigan made you cover all these wide receivers and Colston Loveland, and now, unless Morgan or Morris or Moore or Walker or someone else like Marion Stewart really pops, I think Colston Loveland is going to be double teamed down the field. A lot.
Walker could be a huge X factor.
Yeah. He's just an interesting player. So, kind of overview, what do you expect? I mentioned I think this is a remodeling year for Michigan. I really hope that Michigan does work on the passing game. I think that it could be dangerous to get pigeonholed into just trying to play bully ball. And it might work against the Fresnos and Arkansas States of the world. It is not going to work against the Texas, Ohio States, and Oregons of the world.
Well, that's what I'm most nervous about looking at this Michigan offense is they're going to have to figure out a way to be able to consistently run the ball for 4 yards a pop to get people to start to respect the run game for there then to be a play action and a shot 20 yards down the field. Otherwise, I don't trust Alex Orji or Davis Warren to fit it into holes, and I wouldn't really be comfortable throwing the ball to Colston Loveland, who's probably going to be double teamed every play. You need safer football, and I think we're really going to have to work on running the ball. It's going to be a big part of the game against Fresno is, incorporating a lot of different offensive linemen and getting Marshall maybe reps, but more often seeing what it feels like for Donovan Edwards to be the number one back.
To me, the season hinges on the offensive line. Can that offensive line come together with new parts, new people, new positions for some of them, and really control the line of scrimmage so Michigan can be successful getting 4 to 5 yards of play and continuing to keep the other offense off the field? They're going to play low-scoring games this year, much lower than last year, but if they can continue that kind of methodical, marchy Michigan against Washington 2021 kind of game
Boa
plan.
Constrictor.
Yeah. I think that the defense, and we'll talk about that in our next podcast, which is really, really top-heavy, powerful but thin, can stay rested. Then you can play guys like Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham more plays because the offense stays on the field. It's going to take the offensive line coming together. I think it's the biggest question going into the year. Now, zooming out from Ann Arbor, who do you see as some of the top offenses around the country who are going to be hanging 63, 56 points a game when we look at the crawler on the bottom of the ESPN?
I mean, it's a lot of the powerhouses. You look at Oregon, and they have incredible players everywhere on the offense.
Dylan Gabriel's odds-on favorite for the Heisman.
They brought over Tez Johnson returning from last year. They also brought over former Texas A&M receiver Evan Stewart, who is also a speedster. They have a good running back combo between Jordan James and Noah Whittington. There's going to be so much you're going to have to account for in Oregon's offense. It's going to be a long day for teams trying to stop the Ducks. You also look at teams like Texas who bring back Quinn Ewers, and even though they lost their almost Heisman hopeful running back before he got injured, Jonathan Brooks, they're still going to be strong there, and they bring in Isaiah Bond, who made the Gravedigger play against Auburn in the
Fourth and
Iron Bowl.
31.
Fourth and 31.
Fourth and goal.
Their offense is also going to be looking really good. And then maybe someone who you're going to be like, oh, I didn't know they were good. Ole Miss. Their quarterback, Jackson Dart, could be a Heisman Trophy winner by the end of the season.
Dude can spin it, absolutely.
Yeah, he's got loaded receiver core to throw to. It's a lot of these really, really talented passing offenses around the country. It's going to be really hard for cornerbacks this year to account for all these guys. And I think that you could see plenty of teams reach an average of 40 points a game.
Yeah. It seems like this is a year, that being said, that doesn't have as many obvious preseason All-Americans as other years have had. Yeah. Ewers being the quarterback isn't like a typical year where there's an obvious number one guy like a Caleb Williams or something like that. So there could be some different teams that pop at the end of the year. Missouri always does something significant with their offense. Tennessee under Josh Heupel, that guy can really coach offense as well. So we will see how things pan out, and we'll pivot from here to talk about the defense on the next episode of The Preacher
and Prodigy.
Peace. Oh, geez.